Hello, everybody. My name is Karthika. I am VP People at OutThink, and very excited to be here as I will be hosting this webinar, Cracking Security Culture, the Little Known Secrets. We have two amazing guests on with us today. We have Mihaela Hosmaki from Danske Bank. She is a security awareness lead there, and she is experienced in information security and building a security culture programs. Mihaela has spent probably the last 5 years driving progress beyond regulatory requirements. Her focus has been on identifying key security behaviors and root causes of poor behaviors within an organization. She has led her teams and implemented a series of targeted activities to address those behaviors and improve them. In addition to her work in information security, Mihaela is also passionate about helping people improve their self-awareness and relationship with others, a person of my heart, and she has done that as a security awareness expert, a cybersecurity space leader, and influencer in the cyberspace. Mihaela is definitely dedicated to making a difference in the world of security and beyond. We also have and are joined by Rory Atwood, our head of content at OutThink. Rory is someone who is a learning designer. He's crafting learner-focused solutions to security awareness training challenges. His passion lies in cybersecurity, and he is committed to creating innovative and engaging training programs that help organizations mitigate cyber risks and protect their digital assets. As part of this role at OutThink, Rory creates responsive, adaptive cybersecurity awareness training for OutThink's unique human risk intelligence platform, aiming to make digital training feel more like a conversation between friends. Rory leverages the latest industry insights and research to develop training modules that are tailored to each organization's specific needs and risks. He'll be taking us and talking us today about security awareness training and how to use those metrics and data to implement that into your security culture. Just a bit of quick housekeeping before I pass the mic on to Rory, that if you do have any questions for our guests today or myself, please write them down in the Q&A that we have on the chat box, and we will definitely be able to answer them. But in the meantime, over to Rory.
Thanks, Karthika. As Karthika said, I'd like to kind of frame this conversation today by talking a little bit about security awareness training, which is one of the most important intersections, obviously, of security awareness and cybersecurity function and culture more generally. So I'd like to surface just three things, really. There's loads we could talk about here, obviously, but I'd like to surface three insights that come through strongly from our data, from the human risk intelligence platform that OutThink operates, but are also well backed by other types of research. I'll just run quickly through what they are, and then we'll look at them in a bit more depth. The first is that less training more often is more effective. This is over against the status quo, at least the historical status quo. I think it's still the case in a lot of organizations of sort of larger training campaigns that are not especially frequent, perhaps annual or biannual, are finding, and the finding of other researchers, that less, more frequent training may well be considerably more effective. The second is that more targeted, more relevant training improves outcomes. And the third is that training is more effective when it's reinforced by messaging from across the business, so outside the security function. And the three sort of sources for the evidence for these insights I'd like to look at are, as I said, our human risk intelligence. Second of all, third-party research on SAT. There's lots of good research out there. We pay close attention to it. Some of it is done by our Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Angela Sass, whose work we'll look at in a moment. And lastly, research and learning science. So obviously a relatively well-established field, and there are some kind of core insights that are well validated by experiments about how people learn and how we can make that most effective. So let's jump into the first insight, which is that less training more often is a bit more effective. one clear way we can validate that is with this graphic on the left, which is drawn from our data. And this plots the time that a learner spends in training, in a training campaign, against their performance in knowledge questions and skill check exercises, the various components that make up our knowledge metric. And as you can see, there's a clear inverse correlation. The longer that a learner spends in a campaign, the less well they perform. Obviously, we weren't able to completely isolate the time spent metric from other factors that would affect the score. I suspect that if we could, we'd see an even stronger correlation, but it's certainly more than strong enough to be significant. This squares with another finding from our data, which is significant to me, which is that the second most frequent, and we'll see the most frequent in a moment, but the second most frequent complaint or concern that users have about security awareness training is simply that it's too long. They're spending too much time on training. We extract these insights using natural language processing. So it's not this exact wording that we're seeing, it's this sentiment over and over again, that it's too long, that it's tiring, that I ran out of the ability to concentrate, that I wasn't able to keep concentrating at the level I wanted to. Confirming, as we all know, that learners do want to know this stuff, they want to be safe, and they want training to be tailored to those needs. And again, this shouldn't be a surprising finding. It's a relatively kind of robust finding from learning science that spaced learning is superior to mass learning. And there are a few ways that spaced learning can be defined, and indeed mass learning can be defined, but regardless of the version of spaced learning that's measured and tested, there tends to be an improvement over mass learning of around 10%. So certainly if we're thinking about an annual campaign that might have, say, an hour of material versus quarterly campaigns that contain 5 or 10 that revisit the same themes, there's only one comparison you could make, but certainly that would be a fair comparison between a spaced learning format and a mass learning format. So the second insight, this is about targeting relevance. Our finding is that it improves training outcomes, but it's also a cultural driver. So this is where we find the #1 learner complaint, that this training isn't relevant to me. It's not relevant to me, it doesn't speak to my needs, it contains information that simply doesn't pertain to my work. Broadly coming under this would also be, I already know this. This is part of my job, I deal with this every day. This squares with other people's findings. A brilliant recent survey by the CEB, which is part of Gartner now, I believe, which kind of surveyed a large number of organizations looking at the impact of different training approaches across those organizations. They found that the gap in impact between the most and the least relevant SAT campaigns was as much as 12%, which is a significant bump. And again, we shouldn't be too surprised by this finding. It squares with the well-established learning theory principle of cognitive load. Probably aren't many more well-established principles in learning theory that learning is essentially a cognitively very energy-intensive task, and that any additional processing task on top of what you're being asked to learn is going to detract from the quality of your learning. The level of learning design is as simple as not changing how navigation works, or even changing a color scheme in the middle of a piece of training, because you're increasing the cognitive load because the learner has to process that change. And so if we're talking about a large volume of content that's simply not relevant, that has to be filtered out, that's a significant cognitive burden. So we shouldn't be surprised that adding that burden significantly is to the detriment of the quality of training and training outcomes. The third piece of research, which is very significant to us at OutThink, is sort of built into the product at a fairly basic level. It's a piece of research by Professor Angela Sass, who I mentioned earlier, our chief scientific advisor and one of the world's leading experts on the human element of cybersecurity risk. And what she found was that if you can sort of profile an organization psychographically using a couple of fairly straightforward metrics, one that quantifies people's understanding of the level of risk, and one that quantifies their feeling about it, how seriously they take it perhaps, or how strongly they feel the threat. And that when you map an organization using these metrics, you can create psychographic profiles, and she went with 12, you could have fewer or more, but these are the 12 that we use. And that if you target training and other interventions on the basis of these psychographic profiles, you can significantly improve the value and the impact of training. And that's significant because I think a lot of the time we talk about relevance in terms of job role, level of knowledge, simple relevance to the task. But there's a really important type of relevance over above those, which is relevance to where I am psychologically, to where I am culturally, we could say. I mean, to some extent, this psychographic map ends up being a map of a particular organizational culture, and interventions that drive people from the riskier quadrant into the less risky quadrant are also changing culture as well as improving the effectiveness of training. And the third insight. Training is more effective when it's reinforced by messaging from across the business, from outside security. I don't think this would be too surprising to anyone, really. We found, looking at data from our interventions, that nudges that appear to come from line managers can increase completion rates by more than 15% with a single intervention. It's by far and away the most potent way we've found to intervene and drive completion rates, and we've tried a few different kinds of social engineering type techniques, social proof and so on. And again, it squares with that CEB survey, which found that messaging from line managers can drive not just completion, but actually the outcome, the effectiveness of training, which obviously incorporates the number of people that do it, by as much as 11%. And they also found that messaging from other colleagues, other than line managers, can also have a big impact and improve outcomes by as much as 9%. So it's not to do necessarily with your manager coming around with the implicit threat of that. It's to do with the sense of a culture where everybody takes this seriously, and where that seriousness is all around you. It's coming down through the hierarchy, but also from peers on your level as well. Another study which looked in a more qualitative way at a single organization in depth found that again and again, learners were saying that management's lack of involvement in security messaging was maybe the single biggest reason why they didn't complete their training, or why they didn't comply with the recommendations made in training. So I just want to wrap up those three insights, just revisit them and sort of set the scene for this conversation. So higher frequency training is more effective, but that poses a significant cultural challenge, or several. How do we make training ongoing and embedded? Can it be? Is that possible at every organization, at every scale of organization? Secondly, we know that targeted training can improve outcomes, but that requires a great deal of knowledge and data, a great deal of understanding on the part of the security function about what the specific needs of employees are, even down to which psychographic segment they fall into, where they are on the kind of cultural spectrum of security awareness and feeling about security. And finally, we know that training is more effective when it's combined with messaging from outside the security function. In some ways, this is one of the more challenging ones, because what kind of messaging does that need to be? And how do we avoid creating the kind of fear that perhaps is traditionally associated with security messaging, which can seem fear-mongering perhaps, or heavy-handed, or raising threats because the threats are real. And finally, how do we align the messaging that drives security culture with the wider culture of a company? Obviously, there's a lot of internal communications that go on, and security culture has a specific role to play there, and has to align with that broader messaging, that broader internal culture. So to answer those questions and also much more, I hope that's kind of set the frame for a conversation between Mihaela and Katika, which I, for one, am really excited to hear.
Thank you so much, Rory. This was very, very insightful. I know I took away a lot. But to begin with, I wanted to ask Mihaela actually the question, and it's related to sort of that cultural element that Rory was discussing. But Mihaela, what do you believe is your personal definition of security culture, and why does it have to be intentional culture, and why is that essential?
So, and you have worked with the culture before, you know that sometimes it is perceived as a very fluffy topic, very intangible, very difficult to measure. For me, security culture is nothing more than a series of secure behaviors that we want everyone in the company to adopt, basically. And in order to make it less fluffy and more tangible, the first question that I asked when I created a security culture program was, what does that mean for the average employee on the average workday, right? So if one pillar of your security culture is to create collaboration between security and the rest of the organization, then what that means on a day-to-day basis is that you want your employees to report a security incident when it happens, right? And to trust that that will create collaboration between security and them, and not repercussions or punishment, right? Coming back to the legacy of fear that Rory mentioned. So that's what culture is for me. And the reason, security culture, right? And the reason why it needs to be intentional, and by that we mean it needs to be aligned with the broader organizational culture and to the business's strategy and goals, is because security doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? Security cannot make its own rules or its own culture and expect it to stick, right? If you have an organizational culture that is based on values such as collaboration and transparency and being open, you cannot then build a security culture that is based on fear, right? Because those are very contradictory. It won't stick. I mean, there's many reasons why we shouldn't build a security culture of fear, but we need to understand that security as a function and security training and awareness is there to support the business and ultimately, the whole organization and even the customers.
Absolutely. I like what you said in terms of security is not a vacuum. Like it doesn't work. One person doesn't own culture, right? It's the whole organization that owns the culture. And I think there's this preconceived notion that people teams own culture, but in fact, actually, it's a cross collaboration. It is everyone that has to be part of your culture, and actually culture equals business goals, which equals your values, ultimately. So as long as you are part of the business, you have a goal, you have your values. And I really liked what you said there. And you mentioned that fear that security culture has had over time. What is the history of that fear within the security culture? Do you have a timeline in specific that happened, that culture happened?
So I think the reason why we historically have had a culture of fear around security is because security training and awareness historically has been done by very technical security specialists. So training was a side task that you had on top of everything else you had to do. And because these people were security specialists, they were not psychology experts, they were not communication experts. So their training focused a lot on the facts. And if you know a bit of psychology, which you do, if you come to a person and tell them, hey, if you click that link, you put the whole organization at risk, even though that is true, there is a risk in there, but if you stop there with your communication, that will terrify people, right? And people don't work well under fear, under that kind of pressure. And at the same time, if, regardless of whether they agree with you and regardless of whether they would like to show the right behavior, if they're terrified, they will try to avoid you. And by you, I mean the security function, right? So that's this culture of fear creates workarounds. Instead of openly going to security and mentioning an incident or asking for help, they will try to avoid security at all costs, right? So that is a counterproductive culture. And I think in terms of timeline, that is shifting over time, right? Like what we're seeing more and more now is that we are having dedicated people or teams doing security training and awareness. And these people have different profiles, right? I myself come from a learning background, right? So then the first thing that I did when I started building the security culture is to look at, okay, what is our ultimate goal here? We want to change people's behaviors. We want to change or improve people's security behavior. So we need to look at the psychology of people and not what prevents people from doing the right thing. Because I truly believe that most people are well-intended and they really want to do the right thing. So there's other things that are hindering them. And we need to look at those and understand why people are behaving the way they are. And based on that, to build our training and awareness initiatives.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree more. I think as people teams, you know, we see it quite often, is, hey, click on 3 phishing links and you're out on the phishing simulations and you're out of the organization, rather than, hey, let's try and educate, let's try and make our workplace resilient. And I think those types of policies are actually causing fear. It's causing a culture of what you really don't want, right? And one of the things that I really love to read, that Professor Angela Sass, which we will drop a link to the research paper, but what she explains is actually that fear, as you said, creates that culture of workarounds, creates actually a lack of productivity. So if you actually calculated the number of hours to productivity that people are trying to find workarounds, it's probably going to be quite a substantial amount. So absolutely agree with you. I think there's a lot to be said around culture of change. But in terms of that as well, have you sort of seen a day-to-day change now that psychology has been brought in? Like, have you seen a progressive change in that?
For sure. I think the moment you really communicate well why you're asking people to do certain things and asking them not to do other things, if you explain why that's important, how that contributes to keeping the organization safe, then people are much more likely to do it on the one hand, but also they stop fearing you as a security function, right? They start saying, okay, we're in this thing together. So for sure, we've seen the perception of the security function change over time. We are facing less and less resistance, and we're getting more and more feedback telling us, hey, thank you for doing a phishing simulation, or for providing this piece of training in this way, because now I really understood what I had done wrong in the past, and I have the skills to do it better in the future. So it's we've also gotten feedback telling us, we really understand why you're doing this training or this phishing campaign or this piece of awareness, because this is very important. That didn't necessarily happen a few years back. People were really, really fearing security and seeing the whole security function as a showstopper, right? Like if we go to security, they'll tell us what's wrong, they'll stop our project. So that has shifted, at least in my experience.
And it's really nice to hear that, because I see that people teams have also changed that way of working. It's not just security teams, but people teams have navigated that change as well. But in terms of that as well, have you noticed internal communications being part of that? Like how you communicate, how you engage with people being a big point around that psychological change?
Absolutely. Yeah, the communication is key here, right? How you communicate, how often, and I like to joke sometimes and say that I translate from security to human. That's another big important key aspect. Let's talk to people in very human, informal terms. Like, let's not overwhelm them with security specific terms, because they don't know them. It's overwhelming, and they shouldn't care either, right? Like they only need to know what is directly relevant to them. Coming back to what Rory said, there's a lot of things that they perceive as not being directly relevant to them because it's explained to them in a very technical terms that they can't relate to. So clear communication is very important.
Absolutely. Like I think now in a world where marketing is everything, how you market yourself, how you communicate, we're all marketers at the end of the day. We have to market and get out what we need from people. And I do believe that if you market it correctly, you get the best out of people as well. So maybe and I know this is one of the things that Rory wanted to say as well, is that in research, actually, if you use your marketing teams, it can be very, very effective to get out the type of messaging that you want.
The same CB survey that I mentioned in my intro there also found that using the techniques of marketing, perhaps even pulling in your marketing personnel, can be one of the biggest drivers of impact for training as well.
Yeah, I think you're selling security behaviors, right? That's what you're selling. So the way you market is important. You can market it by, instilling fear into people, or you can empower them and really get them to want to collaborate with you and be part of keeping the organization safe together with you, right? It's two very different ways of achieving a goal, and one is a bit more effective.
Absolutely. And Mihaela, like, how do you think training can be ongoing and embedded?
So I will say this, I'm leading a team that is called security training and awareness. So awareness is a big part of the ongoing part, right? So it's not always easy, and I'll come back to this because I think I've only worked in huge organizations, 20 to 50,000 employees. And sometimes there are legacy systems, there's learning management systems, there's certain governance processes that don't allow you to do just-in-time training, to drip it across, the year. That is something that every training professional, not only in security, wants, because we know and we have proof and research that that's the most efficient way. Sometimes that meets the reality of huge corporations where right now it's not always possible, right? So that is, I would say, not fully yet there. I don't think that large organizations can do fully ongoing, just in time dripping of learning content. But I think that what they can do and how an organization can compensate for that is to have proper awareness throughout the year, right? So most organizations will have a mandatory learning once or twice a year, and then you can complement that with awareness. And by that, I mean webinars such as this internally, right? Where you explain people or where you address specific issues that people face. It can be, posts on your internal social media or articles on your internal communication channels, things like this, to help people constantly have security in their minds and to help people understand that security is part of their day-to-day, even if they're not working in security or are security specialists. So yeah, I certainly hope that in the next few years, we will be able to do really just-in-time training. Like in an ideal world, you would connect your human risk intelligence platform with other monitoring systems so that you can just in time, when people have clicked a real phishing link, just send them a module, a 5-minute video of how not to click phishing links, or if they downloaded a program they shouldn't have, same. And they should get the training just in time, just when they've done the mistake, so they know what to do different in the future. So I hope we'll get there soon.
I like that. So there's one side where there is compliance, and then there's another side where it's awareness. And I think what people get very used to calling security is just compliance. And that is just not true. And I say this with people teams as well, in organizational cultures, is when you say the word compliance, it means comply, which means obey. Lots of people as humans do not like to obey. They do not like to comply. And so that's when you find workarounds. And if you can separate the two, one is compliance, one is awareness, I think you can embed that much, much faster than probably just putting your compliance training out there. And as Mihaela said, eventually we might come into a just-in-time adaptive training. But till that point, maybe separating it out and really understanding what is compliance, what is awareness, and getting that messaging out would be so vital, I think, for a lot of organizations. Amazing. In terms of, and I've always wondered this, but when you hear the words, Mihaela, human risk management, because I've heard the word, and it's a big, hefty, these are hefty words, right? When you hear those words, what springs to mind? And how do we get culture and human risk management platforms to kind of go hand in hand?
You know, it's funny because I haven't heard this term until maybe 2 years ago or something like that. So it's a very new term. And I think the whole, you know, security training and awareness teams are new in the industry. The first thing that comes to mind is actually this quote of, you know, over 90% of security breaches happen due to human error. That's what I associate with human risk management. And the thing is that puts people in a bad light, right? Like if you mention that quote, basically what you're saying is, hey, people are the biggest problem, right? And as you just said, nobody wants to be part of the problem. Nobody wants to, you know, do things for compliance. People want to be part of the solution, right? And this is where I think culture comes in. And that's at least how I see it, right? Instead of seeing people as a problem, build a culture that equips them with the right skills, with the understanding, with the awareness of why security is important, which security behaviors they should adopt, support them in adopting those, and then your people become your solution. Because it's also equally true that people are your first line of defense, right? If they feel empowered and supported, then they will be part of the solution, right? And that's, I think, that's how it goes hand in hand. You have to build a culture where people feel part of the solution and not the problem.
Yeah, no, I definitely would rather feel part of the solution than the problem. I think when someone says I'm creating a problem, I'm then disengaged. I don't have any engagement with what you're trying to do, and I stop listening. But how can the security function then identify the specific needs of these employees? Because, you know, engaged or not, like, how do we find their needs?
So I think there's two important things to have in mind when we talk about people's needs when it comes to security. So on the one hand, you can create this high risk groups of people, which are based on their role and their privilege accesses and their position in the organization, how much decision power they have, how much influencing power they have, whether they can, I don't know, approve payments or approve invoices and stuff like that, right? So that's one way to categorize people, because technically, if somebody has very has elevated rights to a system, you know, and can configure that system and affect the whole organization, well, that puts the person in that role at a higher risk. But I will also say that actually what puts people in a high risk group is their behaviors, you know, because I also give this other example. I myself am not a high risk group. I'm not a high risk person because I don't have elevated rights. I don't have, power to approve invoices and things like this. So then I shouldn't be a high risk person. But if I constantly click on phishing links, if I don't do my training in time, if I score low on my knowledge, if basically I'm giving feedback saying, hey, this is not important for me, I don't want to do this, then that automatically puts me at a high risk, right? And then the needs are different, because you can have a privileged access user that is showing all the right security behaviors, and then they don't need as much training as a person who is technically, you know, doesn't have privileged accesses, but is showing all the wrong behaviors. And then they need more support, they need more training, and maybe even other types of support to go to the right behaviors. So I think that's where human risk intelligence platforms are very important, because you need to first identify you know, people who are in these different groups. You need to know what their real behaviors are, and only then you can talk about tailoring the training.
Amazing. And I think the number one thing that I hear from a people standpoint is, why am I doing this training? This is irrelevant to me. It takes too long. It has nothing to do with my job.
And
sorry
to interrupt, but I do want to say this, because there is an aspect of compliance. Like we will never get rid of the compliance aspect. And there needs to be some understanding from people's side to understand that if you work in an organization, by default, there will be things that that organization needs to be compliant with. So there will be a foundational training that everyone has to take, regardless of their behavior. You can be a security champion, you can work in security. I still have to take my mandatory compliance training, and that's just that, right? So that you can't do much about, and you shouldn't do much about. That's something you have to take. But then what comes on top of that should be different for people based on their needs.
Right. And I think that's where people teams and security teams can go hand in hand, is like, how do you message that mandatory compliance, right? It is actually about messaging, even though some might feel irrelevant to you at the time, or it might feel like a bit of work. It's how you message that out to somebody. What are they doing? How are they part of that solution? Going back to your point, Mihail, how are they part of that solution? How do you bring them on your journey? A lot of the times it is about cross collaboration, of trying to find the most creative way of telling someone that story. And you have to be very creative about how you tell that story, bring them through that journey with you. And, there is a lot of compliance training that people teams have to do that is never going to you're never going to get rid of health and safety, this, that, and the other. But in terms of awareness, we could reduce our times in security, in health and safety by so much more, right? As long as we message it out correctly and we get people on the journey. One of my final questions is, and this is more of a follow-up, but do you think cybersecurity is being overlooked because it's not intentional enough? And do you think a lot of organizations aren't part of the business values and goals at all, and they're not using that?
I think it's very easy to overlook, security training and awareness if all it does is compliance, right? So if all you can feed back to the organization is a completion rate of, X amount of people have taken this mandatory training once a year, and that doesn't provide much value beyond compliance. So that's why it's so easily overlooked. But I also think that security training and awareness, especially with the new technology that we have available right now, can provide so much more. And I would say here that sometimes the root causes of why people show behaviors we don't like is not training. Like, I've seen examples where people knew what to do. They were really, they really wanted to do the right thing. But then the feedback was like, hey, I work in this particular type of role with this particular type of system that literally doesn't allow me to do what you told me to do in the training, right? And in that case, then if you have that kind of feedback, that's why I'm saying, if you have a technology in place that allows you to have some sort of dialogue with your users to get their feedback, to understand, why they're showing certain behaviors, then that information can be valuable beyond training, because then you can go to that system owner and say, hey, we have this system that is actually not allowing people to adhere to the security policy, or it's taking them much more time. It's affecting their productivity if they do the right thing and they're very busy, right? So then the conversations go way beyond just training, and this information or this kind of insights can help you solve some other root causes that concern, the security function as a whole. So yeah, it depends. Like, if you have the right technology in place that, like a human risk management platform that allows you to get all of these insights, to know what people need, to support them properly, then yes, security training and awareness should not be overlooked, because it's a really important function. But if an organization doesn't invest in a security training and awareness team, in technology, or in a platform that allows them to implement a proper security program, then also the value it will bring will not be as big, obviously.
Amazing. I really like that sort of, that kind of return on investment actually is what you really should be looking for. And to give an example of what Mihaela is saying, I had someone who said, actually, I can't put a passcode onto this file, this company file that I'm sending out, because A, I don't know how to do it because it wasn't actually on my compliance training. And B, like the system doesn't actually allow me to do it because of my access levels, etc. And actually that was a barrier. They wanted to do the right thing. They knew they had to put a passcode on to a company file, but they didn't actually know how. And that's what it is making people aware and educated of what they can actually do and what they should do. They know what they should do, is it whether if they can or cannot do it. And there might be actually a barrier that you've put in place that they can't actually do it. But amazing. Thank you so much for that, Mihaela, and it was incredible speaking to you. Before we move on to sort of questions, I'm wondering, Mihaela, is there anything that you would like to just sort of summarize, add to any of this that we haven't spoken about?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I just said, right? Like if organizations want to do proper security culture, to build proper security cultures, they need to invest, they need to get the right people in place to build that, and they need to get a platform to help them do that. Yeah, and that's all that comes to mind right now. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you as well.
Brilliant. That was a great summary, and it's been a great session. But we are going to move to some questions for our final few minutes. So we had some questions that has come through the chat. One for Rory regarding the security awareness training. How long is too long for training, and what is the sweet spot for length of time?
That's a very good question. It'd be really nice if I could give a definitive answer. Yes, you must do 7 minutes of training twice a day. Of course, it's not quite as simple as that. There are other factors that affect the cognitive load of a piece of training and how familiar it is. Obviously, a lot of times security messaging is repeating, is reiterating, is coming at something that's already known from a different direction. The cognitive load there is less. Other times it's going to be new information, sometimes quite dense. However much we try and use that simple language, avoid the technical jargon, sometimes the concepts are dense. So that's an important thing to bear in mind as well. I think that we tend to steer people where they have this option. Obviously, not every client does, as Mihaela explained at length, the many challenges that there are to setting up different types of training campaign. We tend to steer people towards the smaller the better, honestly, and do it more frequently, taking into account also, the familiarity and the density of it. I don't want to give a definitive number. I don't want to say this is how often you should train, how much you should train, because no one number is going to be reliable. But we find that short campaigns at a frequency of quarterly or even more frequently than that are more effective than and I think that certainly it would be fair to say that any more than 20 minutes of training in one go, you are going to see a drop off in attention and concentration after the 20th minute, almost regardless of the content. It's just a long time to sit absorbing information without responding to it.
Absolutely. Now they say even like more than 10 lines on your email is going to disengage someone from reading your email, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That attention span may be getting shorter as well. Maybe getting shorter. Yeah.
Absolutely, we might have to research more into it. The next one question that we had, either for Mihaela or Rory, but maybe for Rory, is what sort of nudges increases completion? Can you provide some concrete examples of that?
Yeah, so as I said, by far the most effective is nudging that appears to come from line managers that takes the line, not a stern, you haven't done this and that's a problem line, but that supports it. Hey, this is something that the team needs. We do all believe in this. This is about keeping the whole team secure. It's not just you, it's your colleagues as well. it's the organization, it's the projects. The CEB survey found that comparing different types of messaging, that actually the most impactful stuff was being frank and direct about the risks, that this is potentially a serious threat to the organization, in some cases existential, perhaps not for the very largest organizations, but certainly for some organizations. And that, it impacts this thing that we're building together and that we all care about. I think that's certainly the most important thing, as Mihaela and Katika said, that the language, the communication be about teamwork, collaboration, mutual support, and not the threat of compliance or the threat of cyber risk. Other things that we found effective are for instance, it's for similar reasons, social proof-based nudging. Hey, this number of your colleagues have done this kind of training. They like the training. Here's what they said. Here's how many stars they gave it. Just to, again, create that sense of, this is not something that my peers are ignoring. Something my peers are doing, are engaging with, are enjoying, take seriously. That seems to be highly effective as well.
Mihaela, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that one really good idea is if you can get all your managers at least once a year to have an open discussion during their team meetings with their employees around security. And it doesn't need to be anything fancy, but it could be like, hey, can we discuss these 3 questions? Like, does everyone know how to report a security incident? Do we know, are we feeling comfortable? Do we have all the knowledge? What incident have we gone through in the last year? Should we discuss it here, see how we could do it better next time, right? So just having an open conversation within the teams, right? And that wouldn't come from security, that would come from the manager. And it would be like an informal, open conversation, and maybe people will feel even more relaxed and even more willing to share their challenges, because security is not there, right? And they don't feel any pressure. That's like an informal discussion with their colleagues. So that could be also a really good idea.
Yeah, managers are your champions. Don't forget that. That is like your champions. They're the ones who get your message out. As people teams, I know I use managers to get my message out, whether it be about compliance or whether it be about anything that we are doing as a people team, because actually the relevance of them in a team, we notice that when you have a better relationship with your manager, you're more likely to do something that your manager is going to probably say. And as Mihaela said, do it during stand-ups, where it's kind of like embedded into your culture that you're talking about it into your stand-ups. And how you can get your managers to do that is send them reminders like, hey, we can have a manager workshop, and then you can go, we can look at actions that you can do to really embed this messaging across your teams. So maybe start from there as a practical approach, as Rory and Mihaela said. And then I think we have one last question. Mihaela, you had mentioned that security culture is wrong, as it is full of fear. Would that also apply for developers and security experts when it comes to training them as well?
I think in general, fear is counterproductive to learning. Fear is counterproductive to collaboration. So I think that applies across the board, regardless of who your target audience is. So I think the way I see this question is that, yes, of course, developers have more responsibilities, because as they're coding an application, they can introduce vulnerabilities that could have like a huge impact on the organization. But again, terrifying them about these risks is not the way. I would say. So it would be the same approach like we discussed before: open communication, explaining people why you're asking them certain things, what are the implications of their actions, and so on. But the same applies to developers as well.
Yeah, so summary, treat your teams the same way you would treat everyone else.
Yeah,
shouldn't be any different. Amazing. It was incredible to speak to both of you, Mihaela and Rory. Hugely insightful. I know I have learned a lot from this as well, and I can only thank everyone else for joining in today. We will be having a recording of this that we will be sending out. But we do have another webinar as a continued series of webinars next month with Paul DeLuca from Hewlett Packard. And we also have Flavius, OutThink CEO, hosting that one, which I'm very much looking forward to, because that will be a bit of a continuation. So thank you so much, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. And thank you, Rory and Mihaela, once again.